My name is Shana-Tara. I am the founder of Clause 40 Foundation, a nonpartisan nonprofit named after the part of Magna Carta in which the promise of due process was first enshrined in document form in the 13th century. We believe that the erosion of procedural due process rights is preventing the advancement of this country and all of its people. Therefore, it is our mission to rebalance the nation's criminal legal system by preserving the due process rights guaranteed in our Constitution through public education, events, research, litigation, and advocacy. Thank you for joining us for part 4 of our series on transforming prosecution. Tonight, we're exploring how to reform our probation and parole systems. We continue our series with a new episode and new panel every Sunday night until our finale on May 16th, when Larry Krasner and several other transformational prosecutors join us for an intimate discussion regarding their triumphs and their challenges. Before I introduce our panelists for this evening, I'd like to note that Clause 40 Foundation does not participate in or intervene in any political campaign on behalf of or in opposition to any candidate for public office. The Philly DA docuseries from PBS, ITVS, and Independent Lens concerns one particular office's prosecutorial approach, and we are presenting it to the public as part of an educational campaign on transforming the prosecutorial role to ensure a fairer and more effective criminal legal system. Any particular panelist's involvement with our program should not be inferred as support of or opposition to any particular candidate for office unless they explicitly state otherwise during their participation. Now I have the pleasure of introducing our guests for this evening. We are thrilled to be joined by the star of tonight's episode, LaTonya T. Myers. The inspirational T is currently the support coordinator at the Philadelphia Community Bail Fund. He also founded Above All Odds, which empowers and supports Philadelphians to create change in their communities through mentorship, civic engagement, and know your rights trainings. She focuses on building power among LGBTQI returning citizens, young people, and families. Chris Ervin is a legislative advocate for criminal justice reform and police accountability. He is also founder and president of the Lazarus Rite, Inc., an academic reentry and CDL training program. We're also joined by Erin Haney, who is senior counsel for Reform Alliance. And I know that she was also a public defender in San Francisco and is also affiliated with former Cut 50, which is now Dream Corps Justice. So she's basically going from the East Coast to the West Coast every single day of her life. And we've somehow been able to catch her in a hotel room somewhere between fixing things for folks in DC or fixing things for folks in California. And so we thank you for stopping by long enough to join us for today's conversation. Professor Henderson is the founder of, and I've lost my notes. I'm sorry. What is the name of your
Center for Justice Research?
Yes, at Texas Southern University. Yes, and you are also a scholar with Brookings Institute, correct?
Yep, and professor in the School of Public Affairs at Texas Southern University. Yes.
Yes, and while I don't have my notes in front of me, I remember something that I read about you, that you consider yourself an equity-based criminologist. So I wanted to share that with the audience, and I'm hoping that you tell everybody what that means as soon as it's all of your time to talk and my time to shut up. And finally, and lastly, moderating this discussion tonight, we have Brett Tolman. Brett is the founding attorney of the Tolman Group, where he specializes in state and federal policy and advocacy. He is the former United States Attorney for the District of Utah. So we have a former prosecutor among our midst this evening to talk about how to transform prosecution. And we are also very proud to call him one of Clause 40 Foundation's board members. So Brett, take it away and have a good talk.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that, Shana. Let me tell you, it is an honor to be with this distinguished panel, and I was very honored to get to watch the documentary and to see LaTonya, you, and to see your journey. And in honor of you, I am wearing the hat that I enjoy to wear. Since I have horses, this is how I could pay tribute to you. I don't think you looked any more powerful than when you wore that hat and you came out of that courtroom, and it touched me. And I'm not crying, Chris, you're crying, or you are, Howard. I'm not. I didn't cry at all during that experience of watching the power that your family, you know, was able to take and to have and to hold and then to use for the rest of your life. It's really getting that power back that was inspiring to me. And I just wanted you to know that personally from my experience. We have a lot to talk about, and I do want you all to be the ones that talk. I spent time as a prosecutor, you know, very proud of some of the work that I did. I prosecuted the kidnapper of Elizabeth Smart, and certainly was proud that, you know, I could represent the victim of such horrific crime. But I also know that there was considerable damage done in a justice system that is imperfect, and a justice system that hasn't been, you know, meaningfully reformed in decades and decades across this country. And we over incarcerate at an enormous rate. But what was powerful to me, and what I've learned, and thanks to Erin and others, is I've learned to look at the probation and the parole and the supervision side. And it's the one big glaring elephant in the room that we seem to have not talked about for decades, and the havoc that it's wreaking on so many families. So with that, I want to turn to LaTonya and get us started. And please let us know what you want to say, having, you know, seen this and having put your life out there for people to see. And I'd love to also know, what did you not get to say, or what didn't get messaged in that you would love to say?
Well, thank you so much. I want to say, you know, first off, thank you to Cause 40. Thank you, Barry. Thank you for, you know, all the panels that took their time out today, and everyone that watched the film. Really, this, you know, this project was something that I'm grateful to have the opportunity to be a part of, but I also understand that, you know, the next step is the direct action. How can we make sure that the system is not using probation to streamline incarceration throughout our nation, throughout America? I stumbled upon my passion through my pain. And once I started to understand the systematic oppression that was happening within my community, when I started understanding that these laws was set up in a way where it wasn't meant for us to win. And it was actually counterproductive to the progress of my community. And I refuse to conform to any negative stereotype, you know, that's attached to me or my community. And I just want to continue to encourage people not to, you know, conform to those negative stigmas, and, you know, continue to try to rise above all odds, but stay civically engaged. One of the things that I really want individuals to know is we have the power as people, as, you know, knowing who our elected officials is, knowing that these judges are individuals that work for us, you know, and they are accountable to our community the same way that they try to hold us accountable to the courts. And we, you know, if we're not, we can't be complacent. You know, this is all of it touches everyone. And it's a ripple effect in everyone's community, and it will continue to get out of hand if we don't stand up and do something about it. So I understand that, you know, as a prosecutor, and now the trend of reforming, you know, like progressive prosecutors, which I think, you know, like I would never been able to really understand, you know, the harm if, you know, certain prosecutors didn't stand up and say, hey, there's mitigation that, you know, can come forth. But also, I want people to know that we have the power, you know, to free ourselves. Even though Larry Krasner was pushing for policies to change, that had no effect in my case. You know, the community. It came to, you know, organizations, it came to my employer that actually had to step in order for me to continue to do the work, you know, and you know, represent me on this case, so that I can understand that, hey, we can file probation termination petitions. And I take that information and that knowledge now back to my community and help other people file early probation terminations. But, you know, I hope that it gets to a point where we can have a statewide change so that these judges, you know, can look at the mitigation and, you know, put caps on probation so that we're not perpetuating harm in our communities that's not needed.
It's very, very well said. I can't help but think about one powerful image in this episode, and that was every time you went into the probation office, it was very ironic that it was a revolving door, you know, and one that you almost feel like you can't get out of. It just kept going, and you just see that. And I saw your hesitation, like, I got to go in this again. If you could snap your fingers, though, what's the one thing about probation, you know, or parole or supervision that you would change right now? Like, what's the most urgent thing that you would change?
The most urgent thing right now I would change, and we're going to change, is putting caps in Pennsylvania. Individuals are given too long of sentences. I mean, 20 plus years on probation. There's no way, you know. I will also change the algorithms that's implemented. Once you see, you know, me going in there, these racist algorithms that is taking the discretion away from judges, you know, to use their human, you know, understanding and compassion to see that a person has changed, that they have been rehabilitated. Mm-hmm. That's the purpose, I thought, of the penal system. It's penal. You can't, you know, atone for what you've done and then move forward as a citizen, you know, when you're still shackled to the chains of your, you know, shackled to the mistakes of your past. How can you catapult forward? And it's hard, you know, it's hard. It's mentally, you know, heavy to walk into establishment and knowing, like, you got to prove to another human and try to beg them to see who you are, you know, and look at you for who you are and not who you was. And I would bring, you know, I would stop the algorithms. I would bring these caps. That's what we have to do. You know, $344 million are put into the system, you know, around the world. Why is that not being reinvested into helping people find jobs? And to, you know, probation officer is not just waiting for a person to make a mistake, but helping a person overcome a barrier. You know, and I just feel as though that we have to reverse these racist laws, these illegal sentencing practices that was, you know, statutes that's based off of white supremacy. So I think, you know, all our, you know, legal individuals that fight in legislation to reverse these racist and laws so that people like myself and so many other can be a part of this fight, this movement to be a part of this fight and movement of our civil rights of our time, and to not stand by and allow individuals to make us fall victim to the traps that they set for us.
Let me open it up to the other panels to weigh in now on thoughts and issues you want to discuss. Don't be shy. I know none of you are shy.
Don't all talk at once.
No, sorry, y'all. I'm so nervous too, y'all. I'm so nervous, y'all. Like, so thank y'all. Like, please, if y'all have any ideas, you know, any, you know, ways that you guys can support, like, we really want to take this moment to bring it to the communities and be involved. So, I mean, the floor is open, and I thank y'all for taking y'all time to watch the film.
Definitely. I'll jump in and just say I want to echo some of what Rite said. LaTonya, watching you was incredible. I think it really struck all of us and really gave a very personal and human narrative to what's happening to so many people in the country. I actually became involved with reform in part because of your story. So you have been inspiring me for a very long time. And Dawood and Miss Tony Willis, who were there sort of outside of the courtroom cheering you on, had called and told me about this incredible story. As Shana mentioned, I started as a public defender in San Francisco, and then I did death penalty cases for a long time. So when I was approached about starting to look at probation and parole, I thought, that's very strange, right? I've been working literally on life or death cases. As a public defender, we often saw probation as a gift, right? And I noticed there were some public defenders that sort of talked about that and recognized sort of the complicitness in that, right? We often saw that when your client was looking at a lot of time and there was an offer of probation, we took it as a gift. And what I've come to learn through working on this issue, and especially through talking to folks who have these really, really long sentences, is that it's, of course, not a gift, it's a trap. right? It is a way to keep people involved and as Brett noted, in that sort of revolving door. The idea that you could do 3 years on parole, and as your PO said, be doing better than most people generally, right? Not just most people under supervision, but most people just generally, and then have to do a decade of probation after that. The needs of society and the needs of justice really aren't fulfilled through that, right? There is no rhyme or reason for that. And I think that we really, with probation and parole, have gotten stuck in that old narrative of the idea that more justice has to mean more punishment, right? So it means more time, it means more conditions, it means more violations, right? That somehow inches us closer to justice. But we actually know, especially through looking at the data, a lot of which was referenced in the episode, more in this situation is actually less, right? The longer you have people on probation, the fewer good outcomes you get, because people end up with technical violations. I think, as your story showed, LaTonya, people can feel a level of devastation as well, right? They're doing everything right and they miss a meeting because they're handling 20 other things, and suddenly they're going to be defined by missing this meeting, and they're going to have to worry about going back into jail or prison. So I just think that your story, it was such a compelling way to show what thousands and thousands of people are going through. And I couldn't agree with you more. I think absolutely caps are an important solution. Technical violation reform, right? The idea that we are even spending millions of dollars to send people back to jail or prison for non-criminal behavior. I mean, that is just nonsensical. So I think it's incredibly important that we sort of go back to the roots of what probation was for in terms of community support, reentry, and really focus on sort of the positives and the coaching aspect, as opposed to sort of having POs in that referee mode of just sort of, pointing out problems and assigning consequences.
I'll chime in here for a second, if I may. What I found interesting, piggybacking off what Erin just so eloquently laid out, but also LaTonya's experience and Christopher, as we get involved in this conversation more. While I was watching the documentary, what I found interesting was that nobody really questioned whether or not we even needed probation to begin with, right? They took the position that it was a given that we needed. And what's very troubling is that we have over 4 million people in this country who are under some sort of community supervision, and we don't question it. We just assume that it needs to be, right? All of our focus is placed on police, and we're not realizing that we actually have police officers in every probation department and parole department around this country. They're performing the same duties, oftentimes with limited constitutional protection on the part of the individual who's being supervised. But I think we need to begin to have a conversation about whether or not parole and probation are even relevant in our society. And I think through those legitimacy conversations, we're able to understand what we really need and how much we need of it.
Great point. That's a great point.
Is it me?
Chris, we're waiting on you. Yeah, we're waiting on you.
Just again, thank you all for having me on. And LaTonya, my sister, I know how you feel. And as I said to you before we started, you keep pushing. For me, the area of focus that I have now is the criminal record. It's in and of itself, just post-conviction, post-release. And as we're talking about the nature of technical violations and violations of the sort, we're also forgetting how it not only empowers, but emboldens a lot of the police dynamic that we're seeing now, the police harassment and such. So imagine in California in particular, one of the first questions they ask when they pull you over at a traffic stop of certain people, are you on parole or probation? And what doors it opens within the dynamic of police brutality and such. Here in Baltimore, it's pretty well known now, the situation with the gun trace task force. I myself, immediately upon being released after 7 years on parole, was a victim of police brutality and an attempted robbery. Why? Simply because I was on parole. And so anything that they did to me, if I was to push back, who would believe me? I am a felon. And so the status of felon and then the stigma of being under parole and or probation opens the doors for things such as police brutality, not only systemic, but systematic biases and oppression, systemic across the breadth of the criminal justice system, but also systematic because after criminal justice comes housing, comes education, comes all of the systems that we are then precluded from participating in as returning citizens or being marginalized from. So there are a lot of other attendant discussions that we can't ball them all up in one, but the notion of the continued punishment first after release, being parole and or probation, but also even at the conclusion of the sentence. We don't talk enough about the restoration of all rights and status. And so that's the way to get at the reduction of recidivism, which is the whole point of the discussion pretty much is how do we move forward? Even after parole and or probation, that stigma of being formally convicted remains, even if it's only as a misdemeanor. Once that record comes up, that officer is able to go at you differently, or those systems are able to treat you differently. And so if we're really about reentry, how do we get to the actual restoration of rights and status, which the NACDL has done a lot of work on?
Yeah, very, very powerful comments. The thing that really sort of eats at me is the inconsistency of the criminal justice system when we put so much power into individuals, because and then it's up to the individual you just might happen to come across, whether it's the police officer and how that individual officer, he or she, is going to react, or it's the probation officer. I mean, you could see, LaTonya, when you even had the thought that you were going to have to retrain a new probation officer on you and on your life and who you were. I mean, the anxiety, I could feel that. My father was a probation officer in Los Angeles, and during the Watts riots, he was there. And I remember this story he told, and he told of of someone that he, you know, one of his individuals he was, you know, responsible for. He got a call that person was in a bar, and he was in a fight, and the bar had called my father, and my father went running in there. And it was such a powerful, moving story for me. He said he walked in and he looked at this guy, Johnny. He looked at his eyes and he could tell he was in that fight or flight mode. He was panicked. There was something wrong. My father, he said, against all instincts, I just looked at him and said, "Hey, Johnny, I care about you. Just so you know, I care about you." And he just melted and just sobbed. And then you know, my father hugged him. He drove him home. Now, he knew that if he was going to put him back in the system, my dad told me he knew it was going to ruin his life and his family's life. But I would hate to have to think that our justice system is going to stay dependent on the decisions of humans on such critical points. So can we develop a system like Chris and the professor have outlined, where we don't have that extreme margin of impact by an individual's mood one particular day? When I saw the judge's reaction, when, you know, you see this documentary and you see that judge's reaction, I just wanted to slap him. And you know, I mean, he so stuck in the past, not willing to learn, not willing to look at the data, not willing to make a change. It was just hard. It was very difficult for me to watch that. That's still where we're at, but we still have to fight. We still have to re-educate and hope that we can, you know, start to see people in those positions. But let's also limit how broad their discretion is. I mean, for me, I was talking to a legislator not too long ago, a few days ago, about criminal justice reform in this area. And he said to me, "Why? You know, probation's important, parole's important, supervision is important." He goes, and I told him some stories, some really technical violations and horrible stories. And he said, those have to be one-offs. Those have to be like just the mistake or the rare occasion. I said, at their heart, parole officers, probation officers are cops. They are. That's how they've been trained. If we need a cross-section of people, if we're going to do this, and I agree with the caps and everything you outlined, but if we're going to have some supervision, they can't be cops. That can't be the mentality that you have, or else you're defeating the very purpose of having that system. And so he finally sort of started to understand it, but we have a long ways to go. Long ways to go.
I think we have to, if I can interject for a moment, we oftentimes want to separate our current criminal justice system and its independent institutions from slavery. And what's very interesting is that probation and parole are institutions that derived as a response to not being able to maintain power and control over individuals on a plantation. And so this idea that we can control people's behavior and we can make them do things that they are not inclined to do because of a lot of socioeconomic reasons, mental health reasons, a whole host of pressures that push individuals toward the direction of criminality. We have to understand how we got here, right? There is a long history in this country of individuals who don't believe that certain people deserve to have rights and constitutional protections. And what you have here is a situation where we don't vet individuals who work in these systems like we should. We assume that they have a college degree or military experience, or they understand how to speak in public, that they're able to work in this space. But we need to understand that in order to have a true system that works, it must be beholden to democratic principles. You need to have individuals at the table who come from all walks of life. My hat's off to Larry Krasner for giving LaTonya the experience, but that is very uncommon in this country. You're not going to find over 10% of the DAs in this country would give someone like LaTonya a job, and that's commendable, but that should be required.
I just want to stand correct. I'm sorry. So Larry Krasner, I never worked for Larry Krasner. Kara Bradford Gray, who was the first Black chief public defender in Philadelphia's history, who not only hired me, but a number of formerly incarcerated juvenile lifers who now work on the staff in motions in different areas in that building. So this is, like you said, to tie it back, to what we were saying, and it was heartbreaking to see judges say the things that they said. When I think about white supremacy and the way that it was set up in the Willie Lynch theory, they're better off on a plantation, is basically what they're telling us. That we need them individuals to thrive. When I spoke to my judge, when we couldn't capture in a courtroom, that was a hard face-to-face. She wasn't, impressed that I went to the extent that I did to get my voice heard, that I had the community support, even though the community elected her and said that they felt safe for me to be in a community. She was embarrassed. She was mad. She made us wait 4 hours. I had just lost my grandmother, whom I was, fighting so hard to live up to her expectations as the young lady that she believed who I can be. But here it is. I had to give all my acknowledgments to a judge that was just basically waiting for me to fail. When she sentenced me, she told me that we're going to be in each other's life for a very, very long time. I will never forget it. And she said, I don't do probation. She gave me the enough room where she thought that I was going to hang myself. But I took that as a challenge. But I also don't want other people that behind me have to bear the same burden and go through the same pain that I went through just to be heard in the courts. We do need a systematic, change in our system so that this is not this is granted. People deserve their right and their true freedoms. We pay the same amount of taxes and get not the same amount of equal protection, as everybody else, because we're returned citizens. But in Philadelphia, we do have the right to vote, and we're going to exercise that right to be heard and to hold our judges and elected officials accountable the same way that they try to hold us accountable. Shout out to Kara Bradford Gray believing in me and allowing me to get certified in mitigation, where I learned that a capital mitigation is paid for in capital cases, but they're not given in pre-entry situations. That's when you can stop. That's when it's most needed, before the harm, before a person gets a felony on their record, they become a failure, we can use this mitigation early on to save people's lives. So thank Karen Bradford Gray so much, and thank you, Dr. Howard.
Yeah, no, and listen, I'm glad you corrected me. Again, this is why your voice is so powerful in this space, because the anti-Black racism that has been in this country for so long is integrated in our criminal justice system. Anti-poverty positions are integrated in our system. And we need voices of everyone to step up and say, listen, there's a better way to do this. We can make this work, but this is how we do it. But it's not going to work if we don't have individuals who have all walks of experiences in this space.
I think also what you were just saying, LaTonya, reminded me of, I think one of the most powerful things I've ever heard was something that you said in this episode, which was, I needed protection and I got prosecution, right? And I think that we see that now in so many cases, and it's not arbitrary, right? You can look at it across race lines, you can look at it across class lines, right? So there is a rhyme and reason for how it happens, right? And unfortunately, it has nothing to do with the case or even with the individual past their, their race and gender and class. And I think that that's really something that hit me when you said that. It made me think about, the number of people that we work with on probation and parole who are themselves victimized and won't call the police, right? One, because they've learned that the police won't help them, but two, because if they do, they then actually have to report that to their supervision officer as a contact with law enforcement, even though they're the ones who are victims in the situations. So it really all the way around creates a situation where rather than being able to get help, to get protection, to get support, right? You instead have to be constantly fearful of that prosecution and of that reincarceration, which is just no way for a system that is at least ostensibly claiming to be helping people re-enter.
So I'd like to add, when you talk about, trying to persuade somebody to see differently than they've been seeing has been basically my life for the last, 20 years. And it's really fascinating to me how what I can say consistently across the board, regardless of politics, regardless of gender, race, whatever, the most powerful and persuasive I've ever been has always been when I have the data, when I have data to show people and they look at it and they say, oh, wait, so here's the data when you supervise someone for a year versus here's the data when you supervise them over 5 years or longer. And what are those, data points? And I'm really, really proud of the people who dig in and start to get that data, because it actually helps us to avoid what we kind of saw in this documentary, and that is these strong held positions of people that are maybe unwilling to look at it. Maybe you won't get that one judge to ever agree because he thinks he knows it all. But what you can get is a majority of a legislature, for example, that looks at it and says, this has to change, this part of the criminal justice system. And I'll never forget, for example, so I do a lot of work on the federal system, and I do work in various states across the country, but, trying to make DOJ see something is very, very difficult. I'll never forget when I had a conversation with several senators in the U.S. Senate on the crack powder cocaine disparity. So you had, if you're caught with powder cocaine, you're serving only this much. If you're caught with crack cocaine, you're serving this much sentence. It's way longer, mandatory minimums. And when you start pulling out the data and you show them that, they're at first going to be in denial. They're not going to think that their justice system is doing something that is so wrong. Well, then you show them the data and you show them what's happening. You see how the law is being, is working, and they start to come around. And lo and behold, even, we have work to do in this area, but they brought the disparity down from 101 to 1 down to 18 to 1. And now maybe somebody will finally say, oh, you know what? Maybe we can go 1 to 1. And then we finally have started to move people in that way. So LaTonya, it's a little long-winded, but what data do you need? Are you still looking for? And what do you think is going to be persuasive in Pennsylvania?
Thank you for that question, Barry. Working at the Defenders Care always told me data, right? Like, in learning data, working, learning, talking to Mark Holden, who was the policy director, that broke down what algorithms was, right? And how they was using this data to justify, this discrimination, right? And to answer your question, we need that data that they're collecting to do it in a non-harmful way. We need that data to look at not what the worst, look at us as our work. We need that data, not risk assessments. We need needs assessments. We need to know and how to understand and address our issues, not to look for the best way to say, oh, well, we're already fighting with mandatory maximums. We're already fighting with illegal sentences practices where, we got individuals that was 18 years old and a person that was a day older than 18 that's stuck in life for jail and they can't get parole, and people that's under 18 now has parole. So we got a lot of work to do on that data. And I just, working with our community to get people to sign these petitions to bring that compassion that we need to have in our probation system so our POs can get the training that they need, or allow individuals to be the community supervision that they claim that, it was meant to be, so allow us, supervise our communities in a ways that keep the people that we are advocating to be home and amongst our community safe. But we do need to collect the data on how many people we're getting these terminations for, how successful they are, and we need to make sure that these algorithms, that we're, conscious of this digital civil war that we're about to go in, because everything is so reliant on data, that people are not looking at people for the human capacity that they are, it's data. And I understand it's both in learning, and going through the system on a personal level, but also learning through it in a professional way now, like I understand, but no, we cannot. This is going to be harmful if we don't use this data in a good way, and take our time to make we use it right and not to harm people. Sorry, y'all.
I think. Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Professor.
Yeah, I was gonna say, one thing that bothers me though is that, for example, I'll use the DOJ consent decrees, and whenever the DOJ goes in and evaluate a police department, they have found every time the racial disparity exists. Whenever we pull data at the Center for Justice Research, we find racial disparities every time. Whenever you look for disparities in our criminal justice system, from police stops all the way to reentry, there's disparity every decision point across that spectrum. I think our greatest challenge isn't the data. Our greatest challenge is getting people to change their mindset and their thought processes behind why we need to be fair and equitable. I think we know the information, it's widely known, but we have a problem convincing a certain segment of our population that people are supposed to be treated equally and equally compassionate. And if we can't do that, no matter what data we give them, they're not going to change their position. Until we can hold people in the system as accountable as we do people that we accuse of crime, we have a disconnect. And I think that ultimately legitimacy is earned through mutual respect and collaboration. And until we do that, we can pump as much data as we want down their throats. If they don't believe it, they're not going to believe it. If they don't want to make decisions, for example, we have a Senate right now that refuses to accept the fact that police reform is necessary, right? And so that's not the data, that's ideology. And we oftentimes gloss over the need to address ideological differences because we think the evidence is going to convince them otherwise. And the facts of the matter are, there are people who are just not going to believe facts if they come from certain people, no matter what they say.
I would actually like to add on the heels of that. So what we're looking at is dynamic change is necessary, and not just incremental or spatial change, but actual dynamic change. How do we push the boundaries? Not just move and shift the chairs about in the space that we're in, but actually push the walls further out and expand the space that we're dealing with. One of the things that we rarely discuss is that as a representative body, our general assemblies in every state, how often when we talk about the different issues, the different dynamics, we always say that we need the impacted people in positions of representation, whether it's women's issues, LGBTQI issues, immigration issues, whatever the issues are, we need impacted people in representation because they best know the issue. A good friend of mine, Glenn Martin, I always credit him for this sentiment because it's very true. The people closest to the problem are closest to the solution. And so therefore, we need to talk more about formally involved justice, involved people actually running for office. How many times have you gone to advocate against a policy as opposed to actually sitting there proposing a policy? And we have the ability to do that in places like Pennsylvania, here in Maryland and other states. And so all of the things that we talk about, I'd say to people all the time, we have to remember that politicians create policy that is ultimately enforced by the police and the courts. And we're always in a reactive position to what has been passed on to the police to enforce, as opposed to actually getting at the head of this beast and starting to create policy because we know how that policy is implicated or impacted in the communities where they're most served. So that's one thing for me, is that we have to begin to actually organize justice impacted not only individuals, but the families. There's a ripple effect. The families and communities that understand the dynamics, they don't have to have been charged or incarcerated themselves, but people who understand. And then when you bring forth someone like a LaTonya, who has the lived experience, who has the training beyond that, and the acumen to still learn what needs to be learned in those spaces of legislation and policy enforcement, then we have somebody that we can get behind, and we know their compass because of where they came from, not just having, again, been incarcerated, but the work that she has done complementary to that time. That you know who you have in front of you because you know their body of work. That's just the thing for me, that we have to really advocate in these kinds of spaces. You know, we're talking about individuals and what we saw, but how do we move the needle now? The next level is we need to focus on who's in office and putting them there, as opposed to responding to who has been put there.
Yes, I just want to echo, Chris, I think that is just a powerful point. And LaTonya, I think right now, I'm ready to send a little bit of money. It's your seed money to start your campaign, because you need to run for office. So I'll tell you this. I got into an argument the other day with a gentleman, and I'll tell you, you're right about Glenn Martin and Lewis Reed and others, you know, and some of my closest friends are formerly incarcerated that teach me every day about the justice system things. And, you know, I thought I knew quite a bit about it, but you can't know unless you are, you know, closest, like you said, closest to, you know, you having been impacted as much as many have. But I got into an argument with an individual on clemency. And I said, look, clemency is incredibly important. And they said, well, you know, I said, it's got to be moved out of DOJ. First of all, that office has to be moved out of DOJ. And then I said, and if you ask me, DOJ shouldn't be able to say anything about clemency. They had their time to speak. They got to speak. They spoke. They prosecuted. But DOJ should be out of the room. And he's like, well, who should decide clemencies then? I said, you should have a panel of formerly incarcerated. You can have some defense attorneys. You can have some advocates, some community members, because they might show the picture, because clemency is supposed to be about what has happened to the person after the crime. You know, what did they do? What are their efforts been? What has their rehabilitation done? Why is DOJ getting to decide what gets to the president and doesn't get to the president in terms of clemency? It's outrageous. And it happens in every state, every single state. So I love that you said that, Chris, because let's have formerly incarcerated They need to be in office. They need to be leading discussions. They need to be helping to set policy. And the other reason I like it, I want them in those positions, because they won't give you a promise on the campaign trail that they'll get engaged in criminal justice reform and then not do it when they get there. And that's
You
the
know
thing
their
that,
body of work.
yes, that's well said. Yep. Other comments?
Yeah, Brett, I think, there's another elephant in the room that we often don't address, and that is this whole notion of states' rights. And, reformers having to fight the same battle on two different fronts. You fight the battle with the federal government, and you fight it with the states. And they're the same battle with two different groups of people. And though you may win the federal fight, you lose the state fight, which we're losing all over this country. We have to figure out a way to deal with that, because the same people, the same soldiers are fighting two wars. And the fatigue has set in. And though they may see a gain at the federal level, they're taking losses every day at the state and local level, which is where 80% of our criminal justice system operates from. And I think that we have to understand that fact, that if we don't deal with these issues locally, which is where the real fight is, we're losing. So we take these federal gains and, oh, we've done a great job. That's fine. Most of that's symbolic, because when you look at the number of people who are impacted, far more people are impacted at the state and local level than they are at the federal level. But I think, we need to begin to galvanize resources and unify behind a common goal and agenda, because we're spreading ourselves thin. And I think at the end of the day, as he stated, as Chris stated, if we're not addressing policies and policymakers, we're missing it. Because no matter what we want to hold people accountable for at the individual level, if it's not possible from a policy standpoint, then that's a different fight that we're fighting.
Well, we are coming up on the latter part of our time, but I want to give everybody a chance to say a few things that they want to our audience, and make sure you get points that maybe you haven't been able to make. The one I'll make very, very quickly is I love learning, and I love being reminded over and over and over again that there's angles on issues that I can't know unless you really lived it and went through it. And then the only other way is to listen, is to actually listen to people that have. And LaTonya, I listened, and I'm grateful for having been able to listen, and I will utilize this as fuel to a fire to affect change. And so thank you for that. I'll turn it to Erin or LaTonya. If you want to go ahead, I'll let you go ahead next.
No, I'll let and I just wanted to say thank you so much. Thank all y'all for coming on this panel and taking the time to listen, but also hopefully take action. That's the most that we need y'all to do. Share, we have the aptitude. Y'all have an army. We understand that sometimes it's hard to not be able to see and hear the voices of the people that you're fighting for, but we do thank y'all. We are here, and we just want to encourage y'all when y'all feel fatigued, or I know those business conference rooms, things can get hard, and it's the disconnect from the community and not really seeing how it's affecting change, but it is. I want to thank Cause 40 for using this as an educational purpose. We now know that we elect our DAs. We now know that we can go to Harrisburg and we can be a part of these discussions and move policy forward. So I just thank y'all so much, and I'm just eager to learn and to show up for my community in the ways that they need me to. So thank y'all so much. Please feel free to reach out to me if anyone has, any advice, books, whatever. I'm just looking forward to continuing to fight for my people and show up.
Well said. Anyone else? Last words. Erin?
Sure, yeah. I also want to thank everybody. I feel like I learned so much from this panel, so it was really an honor to be able to get to listen to everybody tonight. And, you know, along with data, which I think is so important because we have to have people be aware, I do think the most powerful thing that we have are those direct experiences, are those narratives, right? So much of what we talk about in any part of the criminal justice system, and especially with probation and parole and people who are formerly incarcerated, is the dehumanization that happens, right? And it's very easy for policymakers, even for judges who are disconnected, to continue to perpetuate that. And it's much, much harder if you have that real human being in front of you who is, you know, using their agency and their voice and their story to compel action. And so I think stories like yours, LaTonya, you know, that is really how we actually change this, right? That's how we change not only the laws, but the culture around this. And so I just want to thank you again for using it for such an important purpose. And I want to encourage everybody who is listening to this to really get involved. There's a number of laws in Pennsylvania that are directly affecting probation and parole this session. And so please become aware of what those changes are, reach out, advocate, make sure that your voice is heard as well, because this is something that needs to change.
Great points, Professor.
Yeah, 2 points I'll make real quick. Number one, you know, the abolitionists out there that are listening, you know, while you're fighting for total reformation or a restructuring or defund of whatever, there are people out there in that process that are suffering. And until you can get some wins for these people, you can't afford to wait on total abolition. Abolition is a goal, and I think it's something that we should be moving toward. But along the way, people are losing. But I think, you know, in to quote Peter Beal, which I believe in their foundation, the work that they do, is he said that, you know, there's time to shut up and listen and to hear what other people say. And it's also time to ask how it is that we ended up in this position. And I think this is the time to listen to people who we haven't listened to before, but also ask ourselves how we ended up here, because I think if we don't do that, we're going to end up here again.
Chris?
Thank you. And what I would like to add first, LaTonya, and I'm glad first, my sister's name is LaTonya, so shout out to you and my sister. But you mentioned Harrisburg, and I'm happy that you did, because, and I believe he's the director of parole and probation for the state of Pennsylvania in Harrisburg, and the title may be wrong, and feel free to Google him, but Brandon Flood. Brandon Flood is a name for you to know. He is a formerly justice involved person himself, and he is, I believe, again, the director of parole and probation now for the state of Philadelphia. I'm sorry, state of Pennsylvania. And so in that regard, you have things happening that you will want to connect with in your state. I hope to connect with you. Like I said, I'm here in Maryland, but I have no problem moving about, because I believe this is an issue that crosses state lines, and state lines are just further barriers and division. But one policy point that I would like to further really quick is we have to talk more about expungement. Clemency is one thing. The pardon is a governor's at a governor's discretion, but expungement is an actual goal line, is an actual finish line. As the dynamic currently stands, there is no such thing as time served, because if you are a felon or a misdemeanor, you are that for life. It has no termination, and that in and of itself exists because of the modern recognition of democracy in the Athenian Greek form, where there was civil death. And so even the term returning citizen actually has no merit, because if you are precluded certain rights, not privileges, rights, how are you in fact a citizen? We don't have these discussions deeply enough. Why? Because there are not justice impacted people leading discussions. And so we just have to push these things a little more. Again, expungement is the ending of the destruction of a record, because you have served the time given by a judge in a court. And we need to discuss that more. Just towards, again, that parole and probation issue. You can be off of parole and probation, but the fact that you have a record, when this officer pulls you up in a traffic stop or walk-up issue, now all of a sudden you're at the behest of an officer. And again, as someone who has a record, you can say this officer put that in my pocket or set me up, or it doesn't even have to be that egregious. It can be something so simple, but it turns out something bigger. And unfortunately, look how many people once the ultimate price is paid, the only justification for the interaction was the history, not what happened in that actual engagement, but the history. And so a lot of times these histories can lead to parole and probation, but they lead to more serious issues as well. So from a policy standpoint, we need to discuss expungement.
I think that's really, really powerful. I'm glad that you mentioned that. And, you know, I can't even imagine if my father had continued to punish me for years and years and years for things that, you know, I did and then held it against me. And then when I came to him and said something, he said, oh, you know, I'm not going to believe you. You got in trouble in 1983 and I still have not gotten over it.
That's literally the situation now. He says, I'm going to punish you for a week, but holds it over your head for the rest of
Holds it over your head. That's right. That's exactly right. And LaTonya, I just wanted to say real quick before you talk, before I forget, read Franz Kafka's The Trial. Read that book, The Trial. I'd love to know your thoughts about that, because that was in 1915, I think, that he wrote that. And it was about the absurdity of the system and the bureaucracy and getting caught in it. And he got prosecuted. And I'd love to know your thoughts at that. But I'll shut up so they can hear from you. Last word.
No, thank you so much. I'm gonna definitely read that. Thank you for that book suggestion. Christopher, thank you so much for talking about expungement and the clemency. Brandon Flood is, you know, an inspiration to us all. He's actually the director of expungement and clemency, who's pushing to get the clemency and expungement digital, like in an electronic way. It's paper. You know, so people are putting in clemencies and the process is not robust. So shout out to Brandon Flood for that cause and reforming the clemency and pardons in PA. And Ted Johnson is the director of probation and parole in Philadelphia. And I encourage, you know, all our Philadelphians, you know, if you know someone in Philadelphia, to call Ted Johnson and tell him we need a reform, you know. So please, you know, stay in touch, and just thank y'all so much. Thank you, Cause 40 Foundation, for allowing us to, you know, have this time to talk about, you know, these important discussions and, you know, educating the community. And thank you, Brother Chris, and everyone, Erin and Mr. Barrett. Thank y'all so much.
Well, I want to thank each of you for joining us this evening. Your words and ideas, I know, are going to be with me for the rest of the evening and well beyond, and I'm sure our audience at home feels the same way. I'm incredibly grateful to our viewers for spending their Sunday evening with us. I'd like to encourage all of you to visit our website, clause40.org, to register for next week's episode, where we are going to be focusing on juvenile justice. DC Attorney Brandy Harden will moderate a discussion with Professor Chris Henning from Georgetown Law, Naila Bala from R Street Institute, Michael McNeely from the Georgia Department of Juvenile Justice. It's going to be real talk again on a Sunday evening, and I hope some of you can join us for that. And until then, take care of yourselves and everyone else. Thank you.
Thank you.